Every worldview is structured like a tree. Each part is connected to another part. Leaves are connected to branches, branches are connected to the trunk, and the trunk grows out of its roots. The same is true for a worldview. The outermost part, the conclusions, are stuck to premises. Those premises are stuck to deeper premises, which ultimately grow out of their foundations. Leaves do not float in midair, and neither do our conclusions. If you're looking at a particularly dense tree, it might be difficult to see past the leaves, but you can still know that branches lay underneath. Worldviews work the same way. Most people have a difficult time seeing past their conclusions to the premises that lay underneath. But if you care about the accuracy of your worldview, conclusions are largely irrelevant. They are at the end of a hierarchy. Conclusions sprout from premises, and premises sprout from foundations. If our premises are wrong, our conclusions will likely also be wrong. If our foundations are wrong, our conclusions will be hopeless. Arriving at true conclusions with flawed foundations would be like winning a chess game against a grandmaster without even understanding the rules. It's possible, but you're probably going to lose in about 10 moves. Modern philosophy is dominated by schools of thought that deny the existence of foundations. They argue that worldviews aren't like trees, they're more like spider webs. Each part is connected together with no clear hierarchy of importance. Each thread is fallible and can be removed without destroying the whole structure. In modern Western culture, it's fashionable to dismiss the search for foundations. It's seen as naive and a waste of time, as if everybody already knows that the foundations are indiscoverable. I disagree with this. After searching for foundations, I've discovered them. Not only do they exist, they necessarily exist. They are inescapable. And given their importance, we'd better make sure that they are accurate. If our most fundamental ideas about the world are wrong, then errors will permeate our entire worldview. Imagine you're trying to build a house. Where do you start? Well, you don't start building a house from the roof down. You don't install windows before the frame of the house has been erected. You don't paint the walls before the walls exist. There's a methodology, a hierarchy of importance. If the goal is to build a house that doesn't fall down, then its paint color is least important. The foundations are most important. It doesn't matter how ambitious your plans are, nor how pretty your interior design is. If you've built your house on a swamp, it will sink. Even if your house is a massive castle, if it's built on sand, it will crumble. Worldviews are the same. The visible conclusions are like paint color and window dressings. They're largely irrelevant. The most important parts are the framework and foundations, the core structural parts. Most people get distracted by their conclusions while their foundations remain unexamined. Imagine trying to judge the sturdiness of a house by looking at its paint color. That's akin to people trying to judge the soundness of a worldview by looking at its conclusions. Ultimately, once a worldview is already built, the most fundamental ideas become the most difficult to change. A flawed foundation is much easier to ignore than to revise. Many people think that foundations aren't even worth investigating because they assume that others have already sorted them out. I think this is a mistake. I suggest examining the foundations for yourself if you don't want a house that collapses at the slightest breeze, or a worldview that collapses under the slightest examination. It's up to you to investigate and lay your own foundations. Most ideas are not certainly true. They fall into a spectrum. Instead of being pure black or white, they are various shades of gray. To understand the certain truths, those on the outermost ends of the spectrum, it helps to first analyze the less than certain ideas in the middle. Let's start with the proposition, more people live in the United States than in Australia. Now, most people, if they have some understanding of geography, history, or demographics, will believe that this is a true statement. It's estimated that around 325 million people live in the U.S., and around 25 million people live in Australia. It seems reasonable to believe that that proposition is true. But can we be certain? Well, no, we cannot. It just takes a little imagination to see why. First of all, nobody has ever actually counted up the people living in the United States and Australia. They use rough guesses. So perhaps the criteria that they use to approximate population are flawed. That's possible. Or perhaps there's some gigantic underground civilization in Australia that's never been discovered. Or perhaps a biological weapon was just released a few hours ago in the United States, killing hundreds of millions of people. If that's the case, then there could be more people living in Australia right now. Now, it's not likely, but it's possible. We can't be certain. Consider another proposition. If a hammer is dropped from a building, it will fall towards the earth. I feel much more confident about this one. While I have never counted the people living in Australia, I have dropped plenty of things, and they all fall down. Everybody that I've spoken with has reported the same experience. In fact, it's probably true to say that every hammer dropped from a building has always fallen towards the earth. So does that mean that we've discovered a certain truth? No, it doesn't. We can imagine many circumstances in which the hammer might not fall down. Therefore, we cannot be certain. For example, imagine the hammer was dropped on top of a rocket. The moment that it was let go, the rocket made contact and pushed the hammer all the way to outer space, escaping the Earth's orbit. Now, in that case, it might fall towards Jupiter instead. Is it a ridiculous scenario? Yes. But is it conceivably possible? Of course. Now, imagine there was no rocket. You let go of the hammer, and it floats in front of you. You didn't know beforehand that the laws of physics change every 10,000 years. You just so happened to have dropped the hammer at the moment that the laws of physics changed. Now, instead of falling, hammers kind of float in midair. Is that possible? Well, of course. And there's no way you could figure it out beforehand. I mean, if the laws of physics change every 10,000 years, then the last time it happened was before recorded history, so you couldn't possibly have known about it. Not even the laws of gravity are certain. Consider another example. There are no married bachelors. Think about it. If bachelor means unmarried man, are there any married men who are unmarried? Could there ever be such a thing? I'd say no, there could never be a married man who is not married. If he were unmarried, then he wouldn't be married in the first place. You can be certain of it. This is true in all possible universes. It's true on Mars. It's true if we're hallucinating. In all cases where a man is married, he is married. It isn't an empirical hypothesis whether or not married bachelors exist. You don't have to go out and run experiments in the world. It can be understood simply by grasping the meaning of our words. Consider one final example. If Fido is a dog, then he is a dog. This is also certainly true. In no possible scenario could Fido be a dog and not a dog at the same time. You don't have to wonder whether in some weird case Fido could be a dog that isn't a dog. All dogs are dogs. No dogs are not dogs. If anything is a dog, then it must be a dog, and it must not be a non-dog. These are certain truths. Why are certain propositions certain? Why are there no married bachelors? Why are all dogs dogs? The intuitive answer is to say, well, it's just got to be that way, and that's true. It does have to be that way, but that doesn't explain why. The answer is logic. Logic is the reason that bachelors cannot be married. It's the reason that all dogs are dogs. It's also the reason that 2 + 2 = 4. Logic can be understood as the rules of existence. All propositions, regardless of their content, presuppose the same rules of existence, and these rules are not optional. They are inescapable, as I will explain. Logic is where necessity comes from. When we say it is necessarily true that circles are not square, we are appealing to logic. Logic is at the root of every philosophical tree. It is the foundation underpinning every worldview. It is presupposed by every sentence and every thought, whether realized or not.